Moses, you were 2 when you were adopted from South Korea, taken by your adoptive mother to America, where you grew up. Do you have any memories of your childhood before your adoption?
That's a question I don't think uh, anyone has asked me before. Um, n- the answer is no. I don't have any memories of my time in Korea, and it's actually a fascinating question to start off with, because how many people have memories before they're 2 or 3, before they're a toddler. Uh, it's uh, There are other layers to this, however, being adopted and, in a way, a life before adoption versus life after adoption. And what we, what I've been talking about for a good number of years now is the trauma that comes with adoption. And it was certainly a breakthrough for Bessel van der Kolk to write his book, The Body Keeps the Score, and how that unveiled to all of us that trauma is held within the cells of your body. Uh, so it, I don't have active memories, but certainly the way that my body has responded to my life after adoption, the experiences that um, that I've had and how my body's responded and reacted, and uh, it has opened my eyes to, I wonder where this comes from. I wonder where that reaction comes from. I wonder how that feeling came about um, in the first place. So one of the things that has interested me in the last few years is the origins of adoption trauma. And that led me to uh, the uncovering for myself that uh, all of this talk about abandonment and relinquishment and attachment issues, attachment disorders, seems to originate with adoption, with the point of adoption, rather than the point of birth, rather than the 9 months prior to birth. And the more that I pursued this and the more that I dug into this, it helped me recognize exactly what Bessel van der Kolk was talking about. And I've concluded that there is a biochemical link between mother and her child. And when we live in a world that has accepted the phrases, adoption is in the best interest of the child, it's about giving them a better life, uh, that adoption is an option. How many of these mothers are are able to uh, um, uh, conceive their baby and go through their pregnancy without that thought coming through that might have an impact on that biochemical link they have with their child. And with that, the conclusion is once that message is um, implanted, it changes that link and impacts the development of that child. So uh, what I say at this point is that for those of us who are adopted, we don't have a pre-trauma state of being because the trauma originates in the womb. And what's clear to me, what is a fact for me about my uh, origins, about my childhood, that I continue to live with is that I have a disability. I have cerebral palsy, where I've learned the vast majority, I want to say more than 90% of cases of cerebral palsy occurs during birth, during the delivery. So that has given me some insight into what might have been going on uh, before I was adopted.
And at the point at which you were adopted and you suddenly became more aware of yourself and how you felt internally, at what point would you say you started to register that you were internally uncomfortable in a way that perhaps your peers who had not been adopted weren't experiencing?
At what point did it become conscious to me?
Yes.
Yeah, we're 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 kind of delving into a bit of my own journey here, aren't we?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I I appreciate that, Natasha, because growing up, uh, from where I am now, from my place in adulthood, I'm recognizing for most of my childhood, if not all of my childhood, I was in a constant state of reaction, just reacting to life, reacting to things. And then I've put it in the context of uh, survival and being in a place of trauma, a trauma cycle. So I wasn't aware the way I am aware today, but there was an awareness. So yeah, thank you for like uh yeah, there was an awareness that something that I was missing something.
Did you feel that disconnect in your daily life as a child, whether it was an interaction with your adoptive parents or with some of your siblings or with people in the outside world, for example? And was it very difficult for you to go through that journey you were going through in childhood in the kind of family setup that you had? It's very unusual to be part of a very prominent family that's in the spotlight. Did that in some way compound or frustrate or affect your journey in childhood as an adoptive child or adopted child?
Uh, the 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 word that caught my attention with with this question was disconnect, disconnection. That there was an awareness, but I was just living life, you know. And from a child's point of view, all I knew is all I was in. It was normal. And in some respects, in many respects, uh, life was normal. In terms of, I grew up in a family. I had many siblings, like you said. That was a bit extraordinary to have so many siblings. Many of us were adopted from various countries and from South Korea and Vietnam at the time, and the family continued to grow as uh, my adopted mother kept adopting more children, And so there's 14 of us altogether. Uh, 10 of us adopted and four that she had biologically. Um, and in terms of that disconnect, as I said, life is normal. I went to school. Um, I did homework. Had activities and things going on. Um, and being adopted, it was certainly part of that sense of normalcy, because uh, half of us were adopted at the time. Um, and but it's interesting. My, shall we call it, relationship with adoption has changed over time. Uh, I remember as a child hearing the stories of what the the conditions were in the orphanage, and my reaction to that was I want to go back and I want to help my fellow orphans and uh, and help them. Uh, so uh, since then, as I've become more and more, shall we say, attuned to the points of disconnection from myself, from what adoption really is and what it's really about. Uh, it is a journey that I have come to realize is quite common for those who are adopted, who identify themselves as adoptees. And for those in their lives, um, loved ones, friends, teachers, you know, doctors, who come to understand what it means to be adopted.
When you were growing up, were you ever introduced to your Korean roots? Was there ever an attempt to try and enable you to reconnect with your heritage, your Korean heritage?
Um, these are great questions.
Sorry, Moses. I feel like I caught you off guard. I'm so sorry.
These these are great questions. These are thought-provoking questions. And not just thought-provoking for your listeners, for those who come to listen to this, but thought-provoking for me too, So in a way, because there's many layers to what we like to say unpack. And so with that question, um, uh, I I started to say in my head that no, I don't believe there was any direct uh, actions taken to uh, reconnect or learn about or any of that of simply what it means to be Korean. Hmm. I've since learned that there are heritage camps, there's culture camps, um, and uh, I didn't attend those. So uh, I did grow up in New York City, which was full of culture and diversity and opportunities. Um, uh, so in my thoughts, what makes it so thought-provoking, so layered, is that Uh, One thing that my adopted mother did was to create a scrapbook of pictures and letters and correspondences and newspaper clippings and you know that in a way does act as documentation, um, evidence, if you will, of my life before being adopted, my life in Korea, and what my adoption process was. So, in a way, you could say that is helping to uh, um, establish or a way of tying me to those roots.
Has that been healing for you as a process?
Um, Healing is another great word. I'm gonna keep picking these words out. Memories, disconnection, um, and healing. Uh, these are such individualized words. Has it been healing for me? Healing is a complicated word, and I've struggled with it. Because I am going to answer your question, but I do want to open this up, go deeper with just the word healing itself. Because speaking as um, a therapist, you, you know, people often make that association, that I'm in the healing arts, if you will, or I'm about helping people heal. Uh, and so it's yeah, it's a very individual word. It's a very personal, uh, personally defined word. So but healing for me isn't so much of wanting to feel healed, feel resolved, feel what I say, like finishing, crossing the finish line. That I in the same way people say, oh, I've done grieving. I've grieved that and I've been able to move on. Oh, tell me more about that. That's really fascinating because in my mind, grieving is not something you necessarily overcome. It's something you learn to live with. It's something you learn to manage. It's something you learn to create a space for that in the clinical sense doesn't take over your day, doesn't impede on your activities of daily living, so to speak. So in terms of has it been healing for me, it has helped me make better sense of myself. And I think that's part of the purpose of this journey is this adoption journey is to make better sense of who I am, better understand what has happened to me, and to keep putting in larger and larger contexts. So uh, I would say that was foundational, and with other people and other messages and um, uh, kind of helping me navigate. Okay, I remember my clinical placement in graduate school. My supervisor there had written up my evaluation and ultimately she wrote that it's a journey of self-discovery. That she hoped that I would be open to or open-minded to exploring myself, discovering myself more. And that too was foundational.
What do you feel that you've discovered about yourself at this stage?
Um, uh, quite a lot, quite a lot. So, as a therapist and having spent over 20 years at this point, over 20 years in the mental health field in different capacities, and in the last 10 years, I guess over 10 years at this point, half of my career has specialized in adoption and working specifically with adoption uh, cases, adoptive families, uh, adoptive situations, that uh, it's it's opened me up to uh, two things. I'll put it this way: two things about figuring out what are the pieces of me, what are they, and then how do they fit together. And so that may be a bit cliche, but um, that it the journey of discovery is figuring out, oh, why do I react when I feel someone is pulling away from me? Why why do I struggle with um, themes of injustice? Uh, it hits a certain note for me,
Oh.
um, and going from a place of figuring out what's right and what's wrong, uh, to then saying, what can I do about it? And developing a sense of agency, developing my voice, to be able to be at this point, speaking to you, answering these questions, engaging in this conversation with this voice that I've developed. And thankfully for people uh, like you who give me the opportunity to exercise this right to have a voice about uh, things that I've experienced and things that I know have happened to others in similar ways,
Well, it's
and be able to.
incredibly generous of you. It's very generous of you to talk about your own personal experience and to share it so that people can understand better what that experience is, and it will resonate with other adoptees who've faced very similar challenges. And that sentiment that you raise about fitting those pieces together and finding them in the first instance is hugely poignant because for people like myself who are not adopted, we take all of that for granted. We know who our family members are, we know what our legacy is culturally, socially, ethnically. All of these things are readily available to us, and they are part of the building blocks of our childhood and our sense of self and our sense of identity. They are not readily available to men and women like yourselves who have been adopted and who have not necessarily been given the opportunity to access those pieces in their childhood, or to even be given the ability to have them as granted as part of their childhood. So it's a very poignant point. But as you mentioned earlier, you are a therapist and you have worked extensively with adoptees. And there will be, at this point, I would imagine, a large number of adoptees who you work with. Do you see any patterns or themes emerging from the work that you're doing with adoptees in terms of how their adoptions have impacted them and the kinds of impact that you're seeing?
I'm I'm gonna roll this together. I'm gonna, you know, so bear with me. Uh, I appreciate how you laid all that out. And again, I'm gonna pick out that one word that that captured me, and in a way focused this conversation where it is now is being a person first, that we are people first. And adoption is something that has been done to us, has happened to us. uh, and that those who are not adopted, people who are not adopted, are able to take certain things for granted, elements of their identities. So uh, to yeah, in this kind of roundabout way, but I think certain things need to have been put in place, as you helped us do, uh, as you helped do just now, is it, is the realization that I'm a person with agency, with a voice that has rights to figuring out who am I? What are the pieces that I'm missing that for many others in adoption situations uh, are without, you know. And what I've come to learn from not just working with clients, but uh, in a global arena, is that there is a human rights element to this, and it's important to put those two words together when you're when we're talking about adoption, when we're talking about adopted people, right? And so I'm gonna thread this back in. The word adoptee to me at this point is more of a branding, more of a label that takes the human element out of it. Because too often, as with my own story, right? Too often we're adopted as children, as infants, um, and and at this point, there's a growing number of cases of embryo adoptions, right? Well, uh, how many countries recognize child rights, the rights of the child? How many actually have policies and protections in place for those uh, rights of the child? How many of us as children get to consent to being adopted? So putting all this together, yeah, thank you for, in a way, building out this part of the conversation about probably the most important part of my journey of discovery is is not just about uh, I am uh, a person with a voice, with agency, with the ability to speak out about these things or speak up about these things, but um, just the mere fact that I am a person and I do have a right to my feelings. I do have a right to understand my experiences and what's happened to me. I do have a right to find out and be supported in that journey of self-discovery. But it's more than just a journey of self-discovery. It and that's where putting it in larger and larger contexts in learning about, oh, there are institutions involved. There are fields of study involved. There's research involved. There's policy involved. Uh, so it's opened me up to understand uh, all of the elements. Well, maybe not all, but I'm still learning. Um, there's many more elements involved on a social scale, um, in a sociocultural scale, in a geopolitical scale, global scale. Um, there's many layers to unpack. There's many elements to this. Um, and at the heart of it is I'm just trying to figure out who I am.
But
And so to answer your your latest question, that is one of those common threads. Mm. No matter where we are in the world, um, it was eye-opening uh, to experience a I guess you could call it a piece of artwork. Um, it was recently done by uh, another person adopted from Korea. His name is Glenn Morey. He and his wife spent 6 years traveling around the world. I think they covered 16 different countries, interviewing um, those who were adopted from Korea between, I want to say, as early as the 1950s or 60s through the early 2000s. Hundreds of interviews. Right? They put it into this um, uh, uh, I'm not quite sure, but this format they called it the side by side project, and it was eye opening because uh, it spanned generations and across the world, and you could start seeing themes being pulled out, themes of not knowing who they are, wanting to go on this search, wanting to um, understand. And the other layer of this unexplained pain, this unexplained disconnect, this unexplained trauma reactions, uh, the the inability to hold on to relationships or have them work out, or finding patterns in the kind of people they were attracted to, or the kind of people who they were attracting, so on and so forth. Uh, it that was eye-opening because it spanned generations and across the world. And my question to Glenn um, during one of his screenings of this presentations of his project was, "What do you make of this?" Right? Kind of a build off of your question, just here. Uh, you know, what do you make of this? And him being the artist that he is, yeah, and I'm gonna put it that way because in a way it is a bit of an artwork that he did. Um, he said, I'm just here to show, to um uh, put this out there. I'm not here to interpret or any of that. That's what he said at the time. And I said, well then I'll take it upon myself to go that next step for you and say we need to start asking questions. Why are we experiencing similar things across decades, across the world? And it's not just Korea or Koreans. Uh, um, Countries throughout Europe, South America, Africa. I mean, across every continent at this point, we're finding each other online and through Zooms and in person, and we're exchanging our experiences and just describing here's what's happened without any kind of context or framework. And it just, oh yeah, I experienced the same thing. Oh yeah, I felt the same way. Oh yeah, that happened to me too. There's something more going on when there's so much of that. And it doesn't matter if you're 70 or 15. It's the same experience. It's the same feelings. The feelings of feeling displaced, the feelings of not fitting in, the feelings of caught between two cultures or two continents or two countries or two sets of people or two families. Um, and that is certainly apparent when you're adopted transracially, you know, and you find out that you're of mixed race, mixed blood. And uh, so it's also a complication because now the uh, shall we call it the DNA industry um, has taken hold in our society. So we're able to use this new vehicle, this new tool, if you will, to find out even more, to open up more things in new ways, and trying to make sense of that, you know, um, and so there's something more to this. That's what where I'm at this point. There's something more, and I'm trying to put my finger on it, and I think I've got my finger on something because I'm getting a lot of reactions from people, and that's saying that there is a an element of human rights violations, that uh, adoption has been evidenced during natural disasters and war times. Um, we're seeing it happening as we're speaking today, in with what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. The use of adoption, taking Ukrainian children um, and adopting them into Russian families, right? We're hearing more stories out of Canada, out of the US. The US has already made reports about the use of at first residential schools, right, to essentially eradicate indigenous people, to have them convert to American how way of the American way of life, American homes. And that has been evidenced and reported on. And the indigenous people here in the US continue to fight for their right to exist as they are, as they have been.
So all of this struggle is going to have an impact of some kind on the mental health of communities who are being impacted by these policies and these decisions. And there's emerging research which shows a tendency, a concerning tendency for people who have been adopted towards things like suicide, other mental health conditions. Is this something that you're seeing in your practice as well? And if you're comfortable to talk about your own mental health and how your adoption has perhaps affected you, can you offer us a little bit of information about what that journey's been like for you too?
Mm, absolutely. Yes. I have seen it both in practice uh, and going back to your previous question, about self-discovery, uh, making sense of um, my own trauma, mapping out my own trauma landscape, if you will, um, and again making sense of uh, what is within the realm of normalcy, right? In quotes, right, versus what is a trauma reaction. And trauma reactions being fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And in many of my cases, with many of the people I engage with in therapy, uh, is uh, telling them that with the trauma that comes with being adopted, this adoption trauma, you can expect that you will be in, or your child will be in, or the child that you adopted will be in a constant state of survival, of self-protection, self-preservation. That whatever they're displaying to you is a trauma reaction, not who they really are. So all the yelling and screaming and acting out and uh, loss of concentration and ADHD and uh, all the diagnoses that are applied to the adopted person, and I'll just name them anywhere from depression, anxiety, ADHD, bipolar, borderline personality, addiction, eating disorders, OCD. uh, uh, it has been uh, very rare that uh, therapists recognize these more as symptoms of the overarching trauma that the adopted person has experienced, whether they were adopted as an infant, as a youth, or as a teen. um, that we understand trauma is something that is lifelong, chronic stress uh, tied to adverse childhood experiences, you know, and the breakthrough. Yeah, I think I'll call it a breakthrough, landmark study, the ACEs study that that um, I'm going to say, help launch the trauma-informed movement. How we all need to be trauma-informed education, trauma-informed classrooms, trauma-informed parenting, and so on and so forth. Trauma-informed healthcare, so on and so forth. That uh, uh, how how do we uh, um, make sense of, okay, this child is displaying a constant flow of being a survival, that in any given day, you can track, oh, that was a fight response, oh, that was a freeze response, oh, that was a fawning response, that was um a, fleeing response, um you know and placing trauma in that trauma cycle. uh, how do we break that cycle? Well, with adoption, I mean, certainly with all cases of trauma, but certainly with adoption, it's a necessary part to go on this journey, to uncover, to unveil, to unpack, to go to those places that we are uncomfortable going to, and recognizing how adoption has existed in the world and how it continues to exist in the world.
So before we go,
Because yeah.
sorry, Moses, carry on. Carry on. It's fine.
No, oh, I'm excited to hear what the question is, because it's like we go further and further into this, and in a way, I'm in this. So I appreciate this little hiccup here, because I'm in this. I'm in my head, uh, and sharing these. I'm not necessarily uh keeping in mind, am I making sense? Is this fitting together? Is it, so,
It does
so,
fit together completely, and everything that you're sharing is incredibly important. I know that we are going to talk about human rights as it impacts adoption, and solutions, potential solutions that I know that you've thought about very deeply. over the course of your career as a therapist, but also as somebody who is trying to educate the global public about, if you like, the darker side of adoption that people don't talk about, the things that children experience when they're adopted into other families, and struggle with, often in silence, right the way through their childhoods. And we are also going to talk about what those human rights abuses are within adoption, and the line that you take on adoption and your perception of it and why you feel that way about it. But before we do that, I just wanted to ask you whether those mental health conditions that you were talking about earlier, things like ADHD, things like depression, for example, perhaps even PTSD, if that's sometimes diagnosed within people who've been adopted, do you see a disproportionate number of people who've been adopted being affected by mental health conditions? Are they more susceptible to them as a result of their adoption experience?
Uh, Again, thank you for in a way helping to uh, uh, um, steer this or refocus this. Because I do also want to share my own personal experience with this. In a way, my own personal story, and maybe that is a place to start with this. Recognizing that again, my own journey of self-discovery has been uh, putting the pieces of my own trauma together, recognizing that I am someone who has been traumatized, that I do have, and I have been reacting to my life, you know, and in many ways overreacting, shall we say, right? Uh, because that's what trauma does. It is it gets you to uh, filter through um, what you're seeing, what you're feeling through that lens of, is this okay? Is this safe? Is this not safe? Is this a threat? Is this uh, going to harm me? Right? It's all filtered through that lens of self-protection and survival. So for me, I I have spoken to my own bouts of suicide. That I am both a survivor of my own suicide, as well as suicide loss of my three siblings, of Thaddeus, Lark, and Tam, and that uh, in a way of answering your question, is there a higher prevalence? Well, to this day, I have not come across another family that has experienced three deaths of adopted people. And it's in line with the two studies that are widely talked about in the adoption community. I'm not sure if it has really reached the larger masses, the general public, the global public, if you will, the global community. But there are these two studies. One was done in Sweden, one in the US, that focused on this question of mm, adopted people being at higher risk of suicide. And the conclusion was they are. Uh, the study in Sweden, I believe, indicated anywhere from 3 to 5 times more likely to attempt suicide and complete suicide, die by suicide. And the U the U.S. coming to the similar conclusion, um, roughly four times more likely to attempt suicide. And in that, uh, higher prevalence of depression, mental health issues, um, and addiction. So we, with these studies that were roughly done a decade ago, I think it was 2013, uh, which calls for, anyone willing to update uh, this research. A decade old outcomes and statistics. uh, stop having quite as much impact or relevance. A decade, a lot happens in a decade, uh, uh, as we well know, um, at the start of 2020 here, right? So, mm, uh, so yes, suicide, mental health, um, it is widely understood and spoken to that there is a overrepresentation of people who have been adopted in therapy and treatment and mental health treatment. That on top of all the other layers we've already unpacked, that we carry the sense of there's something wrong with us. That along with the larger stigma of mental health and being in therapy and treatment, and that uh, that there's a need to fix us, that we are broken in some way, you know, and you know, and we know how important language is, and that's my little play on how much I appreciate the words that you're choosing to use in carrying on this conversation. Uh, um, language matters. Language is hugely critical to how we frame things, how we understand our realities, and put it together internally and between us. So with uh, with that, we carry this additional layer of there's something wrong with us, and which ties into the overarching dominant narrative of adoption, which is that we should be grateful for being given this new life, this better chance at life, or chance at a better life, and second chance at life, and that we've been saved, and that we're offered all the um, uh, opportunities and um, uh, uh, things afforded to those who aren't adopted, and so this overarching narrative of being grateful and being saved, and that why are we acting out? Why aren't we able to uh, hold down jobs? Why aren't we able to uh, make sense of things in the same way non-adopted people make sense of things? You know, uh, we're not able to take certain things for granted. So I'm gonna stretch this out again, if this makes sense or you know, um, that mm, as a marginalized people, as a minority sector of the population, um, where you are in the UK and where I am in the US, the global population, as a minority group, as a marginalized sector of the global population, um, our people are having to engage in fighting for our human rights. Because here in the States, the two big areas of policy change that the adoptee community is seeking is citizenship and having access to what we call our original birth certificates. And these are things that non-adopted people uh, can take for granted, don't have to readily think about, don't have to spend their time, their hours, their attention, their energies engaging with their legislators and representatives, um, presenting their stories and testimonies and uh, um, and and arguments that uh, why can't we see our original birth certificates? Why are we even calling it original birth certificates? What does that even mean to those of you who this is new language? Huh? You only have one birth certificate. Yeah. And I have uh, 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 um, developed a connection relationship with um, an adoptee in Australia. His name is Peter Capamela Moore, and he heads up the Adoptee Rights Australia organization that has been instrumental in changing policy in Australia. And he just hit the news recently with his own case of being able to put his biological father back onto his birth certificate. That took him 5 or 6 years to have that done.
What does that
But
struggle do to a person? What does that feel like as an adopted person trying to piece their life together? What's the struggle part of that particular process?
mm, where to begin with that? On the emotional level, you know, an internal level, uh, it's having to work through all the nuances of the messages that you grow up with, the labels that we apply, the language that we use, and uh, having to go through this process of unlearning and relearning, right? That's a very key element to this, key part of the process. And thankfully, we now can place that in the context of uh, neuroplasticity and the fact that the brain can unlearn things and relearn things. Um, so on a mental health side of it, on a trauma side of it, that is a key part of the process about that. But then there's a socio-cultural level to this that we're having to face this larger dominant narrative. And we face tremendous amounts of gaslighting. And um, at the heart of it, well, there are two parts to this. So I was going to say at the heart of it, um, there's this underlying message of know your place, play your part. Now, there's a part two to that, right? Know your place, play your part, be the grateful adoptee, right? um, that there is a narrative, that there is a narrative that is being held on to very tightly, very powerfully, where we've made sense of it as having a sense of imposter syndrome. Those of us who don't play our parts, who don't toe the line, so to speak, who dare to challenge it, who dare to say, but something is off, something doesn't feel right. And I know it's not me, and I know it's not mental health, it's not a medical issue. That in fact I'm not broken. That in fact what is broken is this narrative, and I found a crack in it. And so the part two to this is that there are elements in society, in the world, in the global society, is holding on to this dominant narrative of adoption, that is saying we recognize, in one sense, that you are a square peg being squeezed through a round hole. Okay. I that comes up in my individual cases in my therapy sessions. But on a societal level, on a global scale, that is what the elements that keep adoption going is trying to do. Say we're forcing this on people. We're using tactics. We're using uh, um, we're we're using actions of coercion and um, uh, shall I say brainwashing, you know, to say adoption is an option. This is in the best interest of your child. It's going to give them a better life. That there are elements holding on to this narrative. And on a global scale, making adoption work. Adoption has to work, right? People have a right to create families. People have a right to grow up in loving homes. It's now become a rights issue, right? A child welfare issue, a child protection issue. And what is happening underneath is those of us who dare to step out of that and say, yes, I have grown up in a home. Yes, I have had a sense of a family. Yes, um, uh, there are elements that I am truly grateful for. Uh, when we get into individual cases where it makes sense, um, yes, yes, that it has to be, and there is suicide, and there is trauma, and there are mental health issues and addiction issues, and issues that are carried across the lifespan.
So for you, adoption has a completely different meaning to the narrative that is well known and established throughout the world. You also have a very strong line on how you feel about adoption, namely that you think it should be illegal. But you also have views about it being similar to human trafficking, which of course is apt because we're in the Human Trafficking Prevention Month in America at the moment. It's a national event where the US looks at human trafficking and modern slavery. So tell us a little bit about why you feel adoption is both a human rights issue, a human trafficking issue, and why you feel as a result of all of those things, it should be completely banned without exception.
Uh, right. There, there's so much to this as well. Again, I appreciate your choice of words, and it is National Human Trafficking and Modern Slavery Prevention Month in the U.S. Uh, um, in January. In fact, we're recording the day before National Human Trafficking Awareness Day, which is January 11th. Um, I know that we're in very much different time zones here, so um, but I think we're still on the same day. I think it's
Yeah.
still January 10th for both of us. So, um, so it's very timely from what I know at this point to have this conversation and to be presented with that question. And as we've talked, the overarching word throughout all of this is adoption. So I want to take a moment to uh, go deeper with this, to unpack this, to break this down, because I have been accused of being an adoption uh, um, abolitionist,
Yes.
um, that I'm anti-adoption, and it's important to make the distinction, make um, uh, uh, to make the distinction between adoption and the crimes that have been committed in the name of adoption, under the cover of adoption, uh, that we need to look at what is done to facilitate an adoption. And so when we break it down this way into these core elements of what defines adoption, what defines human trafficking, and I also want to take a moment to acknowledge human trafficking uh, is done for a variety of purposes and mm, um, in a variety of ways. So, but across the world, human trafficking is associated with or equated with sex trafficking. It's not only sex trafficking. So there's trafficking for labor, there's trafficking for domestic servitude. Um, there's an exploitation part of it. There's a uh, trafficking for profit part to this. Um, so when we look at the definition, and whether it's over here in the US or we look at the definition coming from the United Nations, um, and the United Nations has even defined illegal adoptions. So if we look at all of these definitions, we come to realize they're all one and the same, because adoption, as it's continuing to be investigated and be found, be evidenced to involve coercion, falsifying documents, right? Falsifying birth certificates, right? Amending birth certificates, right? Um, and uh, falsifying adoption papers, so to speak. uh, in many cases, using the threat of force and forced separations, abductions, kidnappings, trafficking itself. So, uh, yeah, for what purpose? To create families, to give children loving homes. That is certainly the intention, right? And what we also understand, part of this driving force is the industry, the for-profit part to this, that there is a multi-billion dollar industry, global industry saying, oh, this is wow, profitable. We can adopt children and make money. And what amazes me at this point in my journey, but I understand, a lot of people are just coming to this. So I'll put it this, you know, I'm putting it this way these days. We've gotten comfortable talking about the high costs of adoption, the fact that it costs tens of thousands of dollars and sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, especially when we add in embryo adoptions and surrogacy, uh, which starts off at a higher cost than conventional adoptions have. But we've gotten comfortable talking about the cost of adoption. We've even gotten comfortable asking the question, is it child trafficking? Is there a private adoption industry? There was another groundbreaking article in Time magazine a few years ago, um, headlining the the baby brokers and the dark side of the private adoption industry. Right? Isn't it fascinating? Well, or it's fascinating to me that we can talk about the cost of adoption uh, and not talk about, well, what is the cost about? Why does it cost money to adopt a child? In the context of adoption law, but outside of adoption law, when you put a monetary value on a human life, it's human trafficking. Is there room? Is there space in these kinds of conversations and in our thinking and our attitudes and our biases towards adoption to just question, why is there a cost? What is the cost about? And what comes with the cost? Because the exchange is, the transaction is that someone is paying money to someone else and for human life, born or unborn at this point. So outside of adoption law, we globally, I think, um, define that as human trafficking, which is globally understood as a crime and a criminal industry. And there's a bit of research there's a statistic out there that says human trafficking is the fastest growing criminal industry worldwide. And so I'm gonna stretch this out again here, Natasha, that when we do include surrogacy, surrogacy adoptions, adoptions through surrogacy, embryo adoptions, donor conceived adoptions, uh, uh, yeah, surrogacy, according to Global Economic Insights, right? I read this in Forbes magazine, that surrogacy as of 2023 was predicted to be a $14 billion industry. In the next 10 years, right? Or in the next decade, by 2032, it's projected to become a $129 billion industry. Is it too far out to question, even with the best of intentions, with all the efforts to reform and make adoption more ethical, with the outcomes of all these investigations of abuses and corruption and all that we're starting to recognize and apologize for, what adoption has uh, become, right? What we do in the name of adoption, under the cover of adoption. Huh. yeah, that is is it part of this fastest growing criminal industry?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, I think the Pope this week said surrogacy was a form of human trafficking, which is obviously interesting in and of itself because the church has a checkered history with forced adoptions. However, I'd be very interested to know what you think about that, what you think about his comment of surrogacy being a form of human trafficking, and whether you feel that that really should extend to his views and perhaps a broader view on adoption.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you for bringing this in, bring this to my awareness as well. I would be interested to know his definition of human trafficking, what he means by that, how he defines surrogacy. Um, uh, I would say that's an important piece. Um, again, not to solely equate human trafficking with sex trafficking, um, which is widely um, uh, held definition, across the world. That whenever human trafficking, the term is brought up, people automatically think of sex trafficking. Um, so I'd be very curious to uh, know what he means by human trafficking. But with that, uh, it's a start to have a conversation, to open up questions, to engage in a dialogue, in a discourse, to have a forum about it, you know. Um, and uh, in terms of what has happened here in the U.S., and I'm just going to stick with elements I'm aware of and I know. And, so wanting to stick with the realm of knowing here, uh, we are in a post Roe v. Wade society where all of this became a social justice issue in very recent history for us. And at the heart of it was the question between abortion and adoption. And the fact that three of our U.S. Supreme Court justices are adoptive parents, one of which I think had been quoted at the time, I think continues to, with that phrase, adoption is an option. So uh, this does open up something that I don't really go to that is necessary to having these conversations. The involvement of the church in the development in the origins of adoption, and its influence and its role that it has, not necessarily the church, but religion overall, has had in influencing adoption and how it's been practiced and how society sees it. Um,
What are the solutions, Moses? What do you feel is the way forward for both people who've been adopted and the future of child welfare and finding homes for children who genuinely don't have anyone within their family unit to care for them? Where do we go from here in a world which may not be a world with adoption?
okay. So, uh, by the way, these are the questions that we all should be asking. And I appreciate that we're able to have a moment to acknowledge just how profound, um, but to have a laugh in the face of the fact that we have to ask these questions in the first place. Part of me wants to just put out there, just how ridiculous it is that we have built such an advanced society, such an advanced civilization, and yet we have to ask these questions among all the other questions about child hunger, about world health, about homelessness, about the things that continue to exist in an advanced civilization. We haven't found the solutions to all of these. And here, adoption is one of them. We have to we have to be presenting this on a global arena, the same way we do world hunger and homelessness and poverty and all of these issues that the UN has come up with their uh, what is it, social development goals,
Yes.
their SDGs, all 17 of them, right? That this is one of them. It has to be. So with that, uh, these are questions. These are the questions all of us need to be asking and pondering and challenging ourselves to get out of our comfort zones, our places of comfortability with this, just readily accepting adoption as it is, as it has been, uh, as we would like it to be. Um, this is the question that I am presented with more so the more that I'm diving into this conversation that we're unpacking and we're unraveling uh, as we're having it uh, between ourselves and with your listeners. Um, and I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful people are now asking and not just reacting. Uh, you know, uh, what you're saying is nonsense or ridiculous, and adoption is this, and not what you say it is, and that people are shifting, thankfully, to saying, well, okay, we're willing to hear you, and now we're asking, well, what is this solution? And I say, well, that is part of the solution in of itself, is the shifting of the conversation, the shifting in people's minds, the shifting to create the space to allow the victims of these crimes to say, our experiences are true. That there are many of them out there saying, I was left in a marketplace. I was forcibly removed. My mother, my parents were coerced. They weren't able to make that decision without some pressure or some coercion or some force on them. We need to make space for them because they are out there. Many of them are alone and lost, going through their journeys of uncovering and self-discovery and putting their own pieces together and daring to ask, what happened to me? Is my adoption story really what happened? Who told you that? Where did that come from? The solution is asking these questions and daring to ask these questions. The solution is taking this first step to steering it away from adoption as the intention is, as we would like it to be, and to acknowledge and recognize what is being done, what is being committed in the name of adoption. So I picked up your words again, you know, that at this point, looking to recognize it or shift it to being illegal, what it is, in fact, it's not to make adoption illegal. Again, not being anti-adoption. It's recognizing that there are crimes committed that are protected by adoption law. So they're not seen and they're not recognized as crimes. That governments across Europe and across the world at this point are able to have their investigations and apologize. Oh, we're sorry for the abuses and corruptions um, done in our adoption programs, and we will do better. We don't say that when we frame it as crimes. We say we need to stop these crimes. We don't talk about reforming crimes. We don't talk about making them more ethical. We don't talk about um, doing them better. We talk about these crimes need to stop. We need to stop the human trafficking elements in adoption, if we want to put it that way. If that's the point at which the world is more readily willing to accept, because there are more and more investigations happening and falsifying documents enforced separations, forced adoptions are being talked about more and looked into more and reported on more. So if that's where the world is at, that's enough for now then. And where I'm at is recognizing we need to keep pushing further because of the things that we've talked about. There's suicide. There's children, infants being murdered in their post-adoption placements. After hearing these messages, this is now your forever home because every child has a right to a loving home. How can we say that in the face of so many cases where children are being abused and tortured, murdered, and living in such pain, such disenfranchised grief, that they want to end their lives because they don't know what else to do with their pain? We have to acknowledge those outcomes. We have to acknowledge that we have to keep pushing further to undo the protections of these crimes under adoption law.
Moses, I'm so sorry, genuinely sorry about everything that you've been through and your own personal experiences and the challenges that you've had to face, not just as an adult, but also as a child. And I'm also incredibly sorry that you've experienced the loss of three siblings and the unimaginable pain and suffering they must have been going through before they decided to take their own lives. But I'm incredibly grateful to you for speaking with us and for sharing your experience with the listeners and myself and for talking about your views on adoption. the issues that adoption currently faces, which people are not talking about at the moment. It's not really in the mainstream. So I'm very grateful to you for highlighting those issues. And thank you again for speaking with me and for sharing everything with the listeners.
Natasha, thank you. Uh, and I feel your apology. Um, it's genuine because uh, of the work that you're doing, for allowing this conversation, for inviting me onto your podcast, to have me talk to you and reach your listenership. That your apology is backed by your efforts to be an ally. So I can't tell you how much that means because there are many others out there, or maybe not many, but there are others out there in positions of real leadership and power. They're apologizing. Uh, they have offered their apologies, but they have gone back on them.